Okay. Hey, welcome everybody, and thanks for tuning in live. We've got several people on Zoom, and it's also streaming to Facebook. So we're just going to have this conversation. It's recording on Zoom. I'll upload it to my YouTube eventually, and also Facebook. But as we're going during this time of just basically conversation and stories and insights and impacts, just write questions down, because at the end, there'll be a time where Jeffrey's agreed to just answer any question you may have of whatever comes up during the process of listening to this story. So just want to thank you, Jeffrey. Let me just kind of give a little background on how I found you and where that came from. So some of you know, maybe some of you don't know, I wrote a book a year and a half ago, and it talks about our survival brain wiring. It's called The Monster Under the Bed, Uncovering the Lie That Drives Us. And basically it's just talking about how we were born perfect and worthy and unconditionally loved and a piece of God, like a very like divine and worthy, but we were born into bodies that have a survival brain instinct wiring, and that's how we evolved. In our identity was involved from fear, because that's what survival brain, you didn't have the other part of your brain developed yet. That's kind of the basic premise of the book I wrote. And then since then, the end of my book talks about how I had what I just refer to as a love epiphany. And the love epiphany was something that just kind of happened supernaturally to me. I didn't really know what I did to have that happen. And it was just this overwhelming, undeniable, supernatural. And I was born and raised in church, knowing that God loved me and, born again and all those things all my life. But this was like not any of that. This was like something much, much, much deeper. So, but when I've been trying to help people rewire to that truth, I didn't know how to help people, because it happened like it was just supernaturally given to me to be rewired. I didn't do it myself, so to speak. So since then, I've been on a quest to try to help people reconnect with the divine, that is their true essence, their true self. And so I've been doing that the last couple of years, and I have some exciting things that I've discovered. Well, in the process of the corona issue that's happening right now, I have been feeling such the fear wiring in mankind, which is absolutely, what I know is there. And you can see it, fighting over toilet paper in Walmart. It's the survival brain kicking in. And the fear of death is in everyone's face right now, either the fear of their death or the fear of a death of a loved one. And so it's the news, right? It's everybody's hearing the every day, the death toll is in our face. And so I found I don't even know how I found this, but I started on a binge watching of a near-death experience. And I've read some books over the years about it, but it really hit me last week or 2 weeks ago when I started this, where I just listened to story after story after story. And Jeffrey was one of them. And I remember listening to one of his YouTube videos about his story that he's going to share with you in a minute. And I just sat there and cried. I had a mixture of goosebumps, because it's really these truths that I have really rewired to internally for me, but I don't know many people that have actually could articulate it like he did. And so I was like confirming in me about what I had discovered, and also just moved by his story to begin with. So anyway, that's how I found him. I thought, you know what, I'm going to reach out to him. I wonder how, if I can find him. So I found him on Facebook, sent him a message, and he said, absolutely, I'll share, I'll do whatever. And I initially just had him going to come talk to my group that's in my Ignite Vision program. But then I thought, you know what, everybody needs what he's talking about right now. There are many more that need it. So that's why we're here right now. So long story to say, I don't even know how to introduce you, just, you are, Jeffrey, do you see you and me right now on your screen? Okay, good. Just want to make sure we're good there. All right, so why don't you just start and go with how you start these things?
Wow. Well, my name is Jeffrey Olsen. I'm the author of Knowing, one title book that you can find on Amazon, and yet I never set out to be an author or a writer. I didn't fancy myself that way. I grew up on a small farm in the Utah mountains, and in fact, I'm in Utah today. I'm about 10 minutes out of Sundance near Park City, and it snowed last night, even in April. So here I am in my lumberjack wear, and I've been quarantined for the most part, just like everyone else in the world. And gosh, I haven't cut my hair or even shaved my face for several weeks. And part of me thinks, wow, I do the homeless look pretty good. But I also, you know, it's different, isn't it? As we're in this quarantine.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's put me in a space where I can be quieter. I can be more still. I can reflect a little differently. And, in many ways, it is a whole reset on society. It's a reset button, a reboot perhaps. And I trust we'll get through it. We'll get over it. And, from my farm boy days, it's herd immunity. A virus comes and yeah, we'll get sick. And the old and the weak may die. But in the end, we'll develop herd immunity and we'll move forward and be stronger than before. And that's not to make light of the virus nor any loss or sickness that's going on. But the bottom line is I'm a regular guy, grew up on a small farm, went to college, played Division I football. That's what got me off the farm. I wanted to get off the farm. I wanted to go away, and athletics was the one thing that would make that happen for me. And I went to Utah State University, the Aggies, and there I fell madly head over heels in love, like many of us do in those young years. And it was an interesting experience because I was actually quite shy. And although I was on the football team and I had a bunch of buddies, and it was my buddies that drugged me out to go meet girls, and I was very shy and timid. And this young lady walked in the room and it hit me like a lightning bolt. I mean, it was below, it was beyond love at first sight. It was like, it was a knowing. It's like, oh my gosh, there she is. And it's as if I knew. And probably the biggest miracle is that I introduced myself. And we began to talk and we became friends, and the friendship became a relationship. It became a courtship, and we were eventually married. And Tamara was a beautiful woman. She taught school. She was a high school teacher. And our first son came along about 3 years after we were married, and he was a joy. And there was complications through that. And we didn't know if we would ever have any more children, but the second one came. Our miracle boy, Griffin, was born 6 years after Spencer was. And, we had this happy little family. Now, I had left the farm and gone to college. I got a degree. I've always been an artist. I got a degree in commercial art, in graphic design. In fact, they called it advertising design. It was art direction and creative direction in the advertising field, and that was my career as well. So, we were off and running. That's a little background as to who I am and what kicked this off. Tamara and I had been married for 10 years when I had my near-death experience, and it is heartbreaking to tell and talk about. I still sometimes get emotional. But I want everyone on the call to know it's been over 20 years. The accident actually happened 23 years ago. I was 33 at the time, and I am now 56 years old. But we were on a family vacation. It was a road trip. We had gone from the northern part of Utah down to the southern part of Utah, where all the beautiful red rocks and rock formations are. And we were actually visiting my wife's family. And we'd had a beautiful Easter Sunday. And that was a joy. There's certain moments that I'll never forget. And Easter morning was one of those moments that's not engraven in my brain. It's in my heart. It'll never go away. The kids got up. Spencer, our oldest, was 7 years old, and he was running around looking for Easter baskets because he knew there would be better stuff in the Easter baskets than in the garden. We had a tradition of creating hard-boiled eggs and coloring them with dye and putting them out in the garden for the kids to look at. But Griffin, my youngest, who at the time was 14 months old, he was just learning to walk and talk. And he was out in the garden finding the colored eggs, and he would find a colored egg and he would, he would take a few steps, he would fall down, he would crawl, he'd try to pull himself up, he's slobbering, and as toddlers do, but he would bring me the egg, and he could only say little one-word sentences, if you will, but he would hold it out and he'd say, "Dad, ball." He thought he had a ball. It was a joyful Easter morning, and Monday morning came around, and I wanted to get back to work, and we were about 5 hours from our home, and so we gathered everybody up, we hugged everyone, we said goodbye. I put the kids in the car, I strapped them in their car seats, and I was just pulling away from the curb. And this is another moment that I'll never forget. And I bring these up for specific reasons. Life in the end is nothing but a long string of moments, moment to moment to moment to moment. But these moments in hindsight are so precious to me. But I was just getting ready to pull away from the curb. I was putting the car in drive, and Tamara stopped me. She said, "Wait a minute. I want to go say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time." And yet there was her parents on the porch, waving as Grandma and Grandpa do. And in that moment, I thought, women, gosh, we said goodbye, we hugged, do we really have to do this again? But I put the car in park, and she unbuckled her seatbelt and she ran up on the porch. And I watched as she not only hugged her mom and dad, but I noticed that she kissed them both. She kissed them and hugged them, and then joyfully came running back into the car and buckled into her seatbelt, and we were ready to go. Now, I didn't think much of it in that time frame, but in hindsight, and knowing what would play out that day, that very much was the last goodbye. And it's interesting that I noticed it. And the reason I bring that up is I call it the whisper. It's that whisper. Gosh, I'm just going to go say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time. Or that little impression, that little feeling that we get. Boy, pay attention to that and then act upon it. I mean, that's what life's about, is having that whisper and then saying, I am going to smile at that stranger, or I am going to go hug Mom one more time. But on this particular day, that's what it was. I'm going to go say goodbye one more time. And she jumped in the car, and I put the car in drive and hit the interstate and cranked the cruise control up to 75 miles an hour, which is as fast as I could go. And we were, heading northbound on I-15, the big interstate. And there was a moment during the trip that I'll always remember. And it was a moment, I can't stress it. I was simply glancing in the rearview mirror to look at traffic, when you're driving along, and I glanced in the rearview mirror. But in that moment, I noticed Griffin, my little toddler, in his car seat. And he had fallen fast asleep. And it was just in that glance, but it's almost like time stopped. And I thought, wow, look at that kid. He's beautiful. And I realized he was a miracle. We weren't supposed to have any more. And there he was in his car seat. And I noticed the strangest details. I noticed his fingernails. And I thought, gosh, I got to trim his fingernails. And I noticed how long his eyelashes were. And I thought, what a beautiful boy. That was my thought in that moment of passing. And then I heard Spencer, our 7-year-old, playing in the back seat behind me. And I just glanced over at Tamara, my wife, who had also reclined her seat back, and she had fallen asleep. But she was still holding my hand, and I had this thought. I thought, gosh, here we are 10 years into a marriage, 2 kids later. We're both, neck deep in our careers. And she's still holding my hand, the same way she did when I took her on that first date and had $2 extra in my pocket for a $1 movie as a starving college student. And that's what went through my mind. It was this absolute moment of gratitude for, wow, look at what's around me. And I'll never forget that. Of course, my attention went back to the road, and I continued on. And it was about an hour after that it all came apart. There was reports of very heavy crosswinds. There was reports of a pickup truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. The hardest part, or one of the hardest parts of telling this story, is what I believe happened. I believe I dozed off at the wheel. I think I just nodded off for a minute, or not even a minute, a moment. I mean, it's when you nod and I mean, gosh, tell me you've done that, because this is the haunting part of it. As that happened, I believe I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left. The car, I lost control of the car, and the car began to roll, not off the road, but down the road at 75 miles an hour on the hard concrete. And it was a horrific automobile accident. The police report said the car rolled at least 6 to 8 times at that speed. I blacked out for most of that, but when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious.
Mm.
And the first thing I heard was my 7-year-old crying in the back seat, and it's like, oh my gosh, it was that cry a father knows he's okay. I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my son. And that's when I realized I couldn't move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I was struggling to breathe. There was, some pain, but the adrenaline, I wasn't even aware of my injuries. What had happened is both of my legs had been crushed and shattered. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. My back had been broken, however, my spinal cord not damaged. My rib cage had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been torn off. And then the seat belt had cut through my midsection and had ruptured all my intestines. I had no idea. I just knew my boy was crying, and I had to get to my boy. And that's when I realized that no one else was crying. And I couldn't share details of this for years. I'm willing and able to now. And I share this not to be morbid or graphic, but to really set the scene, because what I realized, beyond me not being able to move or get to my hysterical son crying in the back seat, I realized that Griffin, my little toddler's car seat, had broken apart. And he had been ejected from the car. And it was that gut, it's like, where's my little boy? Where's my little boy? And it's as if spirit just said, he's gone. He's gone. And so I knew he was gone at the scene. And then I realized Tamara, my wife, who was sitting near me, because she had reclined her seat, the seatbelt had not restrained her properly. And she had experienced some pretty severe head trauma, which took her life. They both were killed instantly at the scene. But it's the worst hell a man could ever be in. I mean, there I was, a hysterical 7-year-old I can't get to. Half the family's gone, and I was driving the car. It was that, the guilt, the regret. Can't I take back those 3 seconds? What happened? What happened? And it was in that absolute dark despair that my spirit must have left my body, because suddenly everything became calm. And the only words I can put to it is light came. Suddenly it's as if light came to me, a tangible light that surrounded me like a blanket, like a bubble. I was suspended in this tangible light that was calming me, and I seemed to rise above the scene of the accident. And I thought, wow, what's happening? And in fact, I could.
Jeffrey, come back. You're frozen.
Now,
Wait, you froze for just a few moments. So you said, what's happening? The light, and then you froze. So anyway, go ahead. You're back.
okay, gosh, I hope our internet connection holds on here. But yeah, I was a little confused as what's happening in this light, and I was okay. It's like, how can I be okay? Now, I share that specifically because many times and probably sometime in life, we're all going to lose people we love. And they're going to go in a myriad of different ways. I suppose you could argue that I died a pretty violent death, the scene of the accident, what had happened, the trauma of it all. But I share this to point out that the passing, the dying, the leaving the body was the most beautiful, natural thing there could be. It was almost euphoria. It's like, wow, I'm okay, and I feel so wonderful. And I was in all this light, and as I became present in that, suddenly Tamara, who I knew was deceased at the scene, she was there with me in this light. And I only shared what I did previously because she was absolutely gorgeous. She was beautiful. There was no head trauma. There was no injuries. It isn't like, my experience wasn't like, what was the movie, the film, The Sixth Sense, where however they passed, they were carrying those wounds. No, she was absolutely gorgeous and whole. And yet she was emphatic that I couldn't stay. She was actually emotional. She was crying and saying, Jeff, you've got to go back. You've got to go back. You can't come. You can't come. And I learned a lot about choice in that moment, because here I was looking at the woman I loved more than life, and yet I knew I had a little boy in the backseat of that car that was okay. And I made a choice, and I chose to come back. It's like I've got to go back. Now, I'll touch on that too. I didn't have to figure out how to come back. I didn't have to think about how am I going to get there. It was the conscious thought, the intention. I've got to go back. And at that point, it was as if it just I was back. I mean, suddenly I was back, but I was back wandering about a hospital, which is interesting. And there's a whole another story to that. I have no concept of time in this bubble of light and this experience. I later found out people arrived at the scene of the accident. They were able to see to Spencer, my 7-year-old, who he was banged up, but he basically walked away from the accident physically, but emotionally he thought he'd lost his whole family. They had to extricate me from the car, and I was life flighted to a level 1 trauma center in Salt Lake City, which was the closest level 1 trauma center they could get me to based on the severity of my injuries. I had no idea of any of that. All I knew is I had crashed the car. I had said the most profound goodbye I would ever say. And I found myself wandering through this hospital, moving about, seeing the doctors, the nurses, the families of the patients themselves. But when I say seeing them, and I think this changed me forever, I saw them. I knew them. I was connected to them. There was an absolute oneness where I knew their love, I knew their hate, I knew their motivations, I knew their lives, I knew I knew everything about them, and I felt them as if they were me. I was them and they were me. There was a oneness. There was a connection. I felt the abuse that had happened to one of the nurses that just brushed by me. And I felt it as if it had happened to me, or I felt how she felt having been abused as a child and what that did to her psyche. And yet in the same moment, I felt the magnificence of, look, she's here healing as a healer in a hospital. Look at the compassion this developed in her soul. There was this connection, and it didn't matter what they had done or what they hadn't done. I was experiencing was absolutely perfect, beautiful souls. And I grew up in a conservative Christian home. We read the Bible. I had a biblical verse come up as I'm experiencing this, and it was the famous verse where the master said, "Inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it unto me." And I used to think that was a nice verse about being nice, but I was experiencing something far more profound. I realized, oh, I am them. They are me. He was saying, I am the man in prison. I am the naked beggar in the street. I am the stranger that's not acceptable. And I thought, gosh, it was a much deeper level to what the meaning of that was. I was having this profound connected experience until I finally came to one body that I didn't feel anything from, this man laying on a gurney. And I thought that was strange. And so I stepped forward and took a closer look and realized, oh my goodness, that's me.
Mm.
Or that's my body. That wasn't me. I was having this connected experience, but that was my body or my skin suit that I had been going through life in. And it was a profound moment of sadness. I mean, I had always been healthy. I'd always been strong. I'd been a Division I athlete, and yet there was my body so broken, so ruined, if you will. And I realized I'd taken it for granted. I didn't realize the intelligence in my body, that my feet knew how to be feet, that my hands knew how to be hands, that my eyes knew how to be eyes, and I didn't have to remind my heart to beat or my lungs to breathe, that this body was such a magnificent machine. And yet there it was, so devastated. And I also knew I had to get back in. I was to get back in the body. And Kim, you can stop me if you have a question, just raise your hand. I do talk a lot and fast. But as I looked at my body, again, it wasn't like I had to figure out how to get in. It's not like, okay, how do I lay down and get, it was the intention. I'm going back in the body. And I was back in the body. But then I was back to all the pain and the grief and the guilt, the trauma. I was respirated. They put a big tube down my throat to do the breathing for my collapsed lungs. My legs were obviously immobile. My right arm was immobile. My left arm, they had eventually tied down because I kept grabbing at all the medical equipment. And I heard a lot. It was really crazy. I learned a whole new aspect of what it means to be still. I couldn't do anything else. I literally had to lay there and wallow in it, contemplating this experience that had happened, at the same time dealing with all the grief and the loss that had happened. And the hospital was a very long and interesting experience. And it's almost like the door didn't shut. I was in the hospital for over 5 months. I had 18 surgeries in total, putting me back together. But it's like I had one foot in this realm and one foot in the other realm during that experience. It's funny, one of my level 1 trauma docs actually became a friend of mine. And that's a whole nother side story. But we became friends because he shared with me after the fact. He came back to see me, probably a month or so after the accident had happened. I was still I was out of intensive care, but I was in surgical recovery. And I ended up going back into intensive care after his visit. But he literally came and shared that he had experienced my wife, Tamra, her spirit in the ER room.
Mm.
That he had literally seen her standing above my body and that she had communicated to him. And I was shocked. I'm like, gosh, you're a doctor and you've come and you've told me this. He didn't know me from Adam. He didn't know that I had had this profound near death or out of body experience. And I simply asked him, what did she say? What was she communicating? And he said she was simply sharing her gratitude for what we were doing to save your life, because she knew you had that son that she wanted you to raise. And forgive the tears, but it was a beautiful thing. And I just thought, wow. And I didn't share with him anything that had happened to me at that point, but we eventually became friends. And he's a funny guy. When I say I have one foot in this realm and one foot in the next, and that's how the hospital was, he says, well, we know which foot was in the other realm. It's the one we cut off, And so he has a good humor about that. And he's a dear friend now. But the hospital was a long, interesting experience. And I learned a lot about people. I would experience nurses and doctors as they would come into the room, and I even sight unseen, I would feel them. I would feel their vibration. I would feel their level of compassion. I had a strange connection still. And I learned a lot about men. On the farm, my parents divorced when I was young, and I had spent my early years with my mother, but ended up on the farm with my dad, who was single, and 2 brothers. So it was like the old Bonanza. It was a man's world on the farm, rough and tumble. and my brothers were rough and tumble. But gosh, they almost lost their jobs to come and sit with me and make sure I was okay. And on one occasion, the abdominal injuries where the seatbelt tore me open, the infections were horrific because of, rupturing the intestine and everything inside my abdomen. And they had to pack the wounds. They would have to pack them with gauze. And I don't know if there's any medical people watching. And then they'd have to unpack them. The stripping, it was for healing. They had to get the infection out and strip the wound so it would eventually heal. And it was so horrific. At one point, my older brother was there, and he was a trained EMT and law enforcement officer at the time. He's now retired law enforcement and become a full-time firefighter. He's an absolute adrenaline junkie. But he was there, and it was so grotesque. The nurses got sick, and one of them was vomiting in the garbage pail. And
Gosh.
I mean, it was, it was rotten. It was horrible. And he said, you know what, let me do it.
Mm.
And, here was my big brother, and he started stuffing and packing the wound, and his hands were not near as gentle nor as small as the nurse that had been doing it. And I was wincing in pain, and he's talking to me as a man talks to a man, knock it off, lay still, you big wimp. I mean, and I thought, why is he so mean and tough? He'd always been, my mentor in many ways. In the divorce, I mean, my father was still very much involved with this, but gosh, my big brother had become the father figure in my mom's home as we were young. And I just thought, why is he so hard on me? And yet as I was having that thought, I happened to just look up at him. And as he's packing the gut of his little brother and talking to me tough, there's these tears rolling down his face.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, that's a real man, a gentle man. I mean, loving enough to take over and do the dirty work, and talk to me, in a way that will get me to settle down, but loving enough to say, I'll do this. And anyway, I don't want to digress too much, but I learned a lot in the hospital. And I learned a lot about people, and I learned an awful lot about myself.
Are you going to talk about the second
Yeah.
NDE? Was that
I,
coming? Okay, sorry, I didn't know.
no, yeah, no, and the second NDE
Oh,
was the most profound, actually.
yeah.
Because here I'd had these connections with Tamra, the goodbye I said, and she seemed to be very near, even in those months in the hospital. But I'd been haunted about my little boy, Griffin, and what had happened. And I think it's interesting to point out the profound first near-death experience was at the scene of the accident, before narcotics or anything had been administered. This next experience that I'm going to share was at the end of my hospital stay. I had been out of ICU, surgical recovery, back to ICU, back to surgical recovery. In fact, it was only a week or so before I was to come home. And I was in the rehabilitation wing. They had repaired my shoulder the best they could, and they were teaching me how to get into a wheelchair. I had one leg chopped off. My right leg was in a brace sticking straight out. My right arm was in a sling, and I had one hand to drive an electric wheelchair. And they were teaching me how to scoot from the bed and try to get in the chair. And
Mm.
without an arm or leg, it was difficult to do. But that was the point I was at. And I knew I was healing. I was going to come home. And I remember falling asleep one night. And it was interesting because they'd finally stabilized my abdominal wound, so I was able to lay on my side. And it was so comfortable and peaceful to lay on my side. I had laid on my back so long that I had actually rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. I was bald on the back. And my younger brother was here with me this night. He was teasing me about going bald. But I fell into a deep, beautiful sleep. And I was aware of, gosh, I'm actually sleeping. It was almost like, I don't know if I've slept for these last 4 months. I don't know, but it was this beautiful sleep. And I felt that light again, just like at the accident. This light came, this embracing, warm, comforting blanket of light came. And I began to feel like I was rising above the hospital bed again. And yet this time the light dispensed. It disappeared like fog off a lake, and suddenly I was in the most beautiful, glorious place. And, I've heard people say heaven or the spirit world. The only word I can put on this is I was home. I mean, I was home, and I was so elated. I was just giddy, and I felt so welcomed and so loved and so familiar. And I actually began to run. I started to run. And I can't stress how physical the experience was. I was running, and when I say physical, it was beyond physical. It was sensual. I mean, I could feel the ground under my feet and the energy charging up through my calves and thighs. And I was literally joyfully running, thinking, I'm home. And I knew in this realm I wouldn't be running, but there I was whole. I was absolutely whole. And that's when I got the message or the knowing. It was just an intuitive thing. I'm not here to stay. And at that same time, there was this corridor off to my left, and I just knew intuitively I'm to go that way. And I did. I began working my way down the corridor. And at the end of the corridor, there was this crib. And our little boy Griffin had still been sleeping in a crib at home at the time of the accident. And so I rushed to this crib, and there was my little boy. I mean, there he was sleeping in that crib as beautifully and as peacefully as I had seen him when I glanced in the rearview mirror that day. And I swept him up and picked him up. And it's interesting because I could feel his ribs expanding with breath. Have you ever picked up a sleeping child? The weight and the heat, and I held him up, and I could feel his breath on my neck, and it was all so, I could feel it. He was solid against me. And I even was thinking, how can this be? If I'm gone, how is it such a physical experience? And I get emotional when I talk about it, but I just thought, this can't be. And I leaned over and I smelled his hair just to make sure it's like it's him. I could smell. I'm like, it's him. And I began to weep, just holding my beautiful child. And as I did that, I felt this intense presence coming up behind me, this overwhelming, powerful, wise, cosmic presence. And I began to be fearful. All this guilt came up again. I'm thinking, gosh, my little boy died because I crashed the car. His life was cut short because I lost control of the car. It's my fault. And this guilt began to bubble up. And as I held this beloved child of mine, the thought I had is, I hope I'm forgiven. I hope I can somehow be forgiven. And as I had that thought, this presence, this being had come so close that I felt these arms, and this almost felt physical too. It's like these arms just wrapped around me and my little boy. And that's when the lid came off. There was just this download of unconditional love. What began to flow is, there's nothing to forgive. Your life is perfect. Everything's in divine order. You are beloved. You are. There aren't words to explain what I experienced, but if I could articulate it, here I am holding my child, and to me, he's perfect and beautiful and brilliant. Even though on Easter morning, he was calling colored eggs balls and stumbling and falling and slobbering down his chin. But to me, he was absolutely glorious and divine. And yet in those divine arms, suddenly I became that. I was absolutely perfect and glorious and divine. And I suppose I had what they call a life review, because I began to see my life, I began to see my childhood. I saw my parents' divorce. I saw the insecurities that it created in me. I saw the people in my life, and I saw things. I'd be like, oh, no, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. Oh no, that I knew that was wrong, but I did it anyway. But here again, I was trying to explain everything away. And in those beloved arms, every time I would do that, the conversation, or it wasn't like words, it was like it would just flow into my whole being, was, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love you. You're perfect to us. And when I say that, it was a very personal experience, but I knew if I am, that we all are. I mean, this was the love of God, if you will, experienced personally, but I was also feeling it on this cosmic level of everyone. Every
Jeffrey, come back. There, okay, you froze again. That's okay. We were with you.
uh,
Go ahead. Everyone.
internet in the mountains.
It's okay. It's all in divine order.
Well, yes, I suppose it is. In everyone, there was that much love. And I did learn about choice again. In fact, this was explained to me in a very profound way. I knew Griffin was gone, you know, but what I was given is, you can be angry at God and the entire universe if you want to, believing that your family was yanked away from you. Or you can blame yourself for the rest of your life and beat yourself up because you were driving the car. That's all a choice. Or in this beautiful divine moment, you can exercise your will. You can exercise your agency. I now say the only cosmic rule is there's free choice. We get to choose. And that was a beautiful thing too, because I had grown up believing that life was a test, that God was going to judge me, that I was probably failing, that I was never going to measure up. And yet in these arms, suddenly all of that was expanded and turned upside down and inside out. I realized that life was an absolute gift, an absolute beautiful gift, every moment of it. And that I was loved beyond anything I could comprehend. There was no judgment. There was no belittling. There was no measuring up. I was literally viewed as perfect and divine and connected. And as I held my little boy and I was told, you can choose to give him back, you can exercise your will. My upbringing, I said, oh God, I thought it was your will be done, not my will be done. And it was literally communicated to me, your will is my will.
Mm.
And I said, my will is your will. I am that. And then those words rung through my consciousness, I am that I am. In other words, I'm connected to that. I'm a part of that. I'm a manifestation of that. And in all that love and peace and beauty and connection, I was able to kiss my little boy. And I gave him back. I handed him over. And then I woke up, back into the hospital bed and the injuries and the wheelchair and all that was going to go on. But perhaps with a little different perspective. And, I don't want anyone to think I had this accident and had some profound experiences and I was okay. That's not true. I had the accident. I had some beautiful, profound experiences and I grieved. I grieved like anybody else did. In fact, going home was one of the hardest things, I've probably ever had to do. Nobody had dared unpack the suitcases from the trip, and my mother, who was so kind, she said, maybe you ought to do that when you're ready. And then my little boy, Spencer, I mean, he had been to see me in the hospital, but going home to see him, I mean, I thought, how's he going to deal with this? I was the rough and tumble dad with the foot race, and I'd throw him in the air. And, now I was in a wheelchair with one arm. What was this going to be like? And I looked like I'd lost 60 pounds. It was a rough time. And I thought, how's he ever going to accept me this way? And that's a beautiful story too. And I'll share that briefly because I do want to get to questions. My brothers came to bring me home, and they literally had to pick me up and put me in the wheelchair. And I was still going to have home health and nurses and doctors seeing me. My younger brother had taken Spencer into his home just like he was one of his own. And I was going to be staying with them for a while. And they'd put a hospital bed in one of their extra rooms. And anyway, they came to get me and bring me to my younger brother's house. And all the way home, I just thought, how's Spencer going to deal with this? And what's his life been disrupted like, And as we got home, I saw him looking out the window. He was watching as his uncles, and they're burly guys, were picking me up out of the car and putting me in the wheelchair. So here was my brothers, his uncles, putting, me, his dad, in the wheelchair. And I saw him looking out the window. And I began to make my way to the ramp that my brothers had built so I would be able to get in the house by myself. They were fierce about me becoming independent. And Spencer came running out of the house. And he ran toward me, but he came toward me and he ran right past me. He went right by. And I thought, oh, I knew this was going to be hard for him. I knew this would be tough for him to accept. I looked like a mess. I had a big colostomy bag, hanging off my belly from the intestinal injuries. I just thought this is going to be really hard for him. And that's okay. We'll have to deal with that as we go. And I began to make my way to the house. And when I turned to go up the ramp, I just looked and I noticed what he had actually done is he had run past me, but he'd gone to all the neighbors and he was knocking on all the doors. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, come out. My dad has made it home. My dad made it home. Come see my dad. And I realized that my judgments were not his judgments. He was just pleased to have me there. And he made his rounds, and he eventually did come and jump on my lap, which just about killed me because I had all the sutures, from the surgeries. And he threw his arms around me. We still laugh. He's all grown up now. He's married. He's 6'2", and he's a full-grown man. But I said, it's going to be a while. I'm going to be like this. Can you deal with this? Are we going to be okay? We're going to work hard. And he was a Star Wars nut. So I put it in terms he might understand. I said, they're going to get me a really cool Darth Vader leg and I'll learn to walk again. And I said, can you handle it? And we still laugh about what he said. He said, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you. And I burst into tears. And this is the reason I share this story is, what I realized, and it was a huge epiphany, is that in a wheelchair holding my surviving son in this realm was no less divine than holding my son who had passed in that realm. I mean, suddenly heaven was right here. Mm-hmm. There was nowhere to go or nothing to become. It was simply to be in that perfect, beautiful moment and realize the divinity of our lives. I mean, you talked very early on, Kim, about this pandemic we're in and COVID-19 and people are dying and everybody's aware of death. Death is what gives life meaning. I mean, otherwise, what's the point, right? I mean, I forgive the bad sports analogy, but I was so frustrated we didn't get to see March Madness this year, and yet, I've watched those games and you realize if there's not a time clock, then who cares what the score is, right? I mean, if there's no end, then what's the point in playing the game? And I think life is like that. If we don't have death, then what's the point in life? And yet I also learned there is no death. Mm-hmm. It was like walking from one room to the next. It was another realm, a glorious realm. And so everything changed and turned upside down for me. And gosh, life went on. I got back home. I was fitted with the prosthetic. I was able to get back to work. I worked for months in the wheelchair and had beautiful friends at work that were so good to me to cart me back and forth and push me down the hallway and get me up the stairs and everything else it took. Angels came. I did grieve bitterly. I cried a lot. I was lonely. It's all in my book, Knowing, of what, it's a personal memoir, and I'm pretty transparent in it. And sometimes angels looked like my brothers or my family. Sometimes they were neighbors. Sometimes I know I had support from the angelic realms. I certainly had 2 guardian angels in my wife and child that looked after me, but another angel came. And
that you felt or that you saw?
Well, let me put it this way. One of the angels that came was my current wife, Tanya. She came into my life. This was, after the accident, and it had been a year or so, and I was learning to walk. I was back to work, and I was still grieving miserably, but she came into a work meeting. I wasn't dating. I wasn't looking. I was heartbroken still. And she walked into this room, and it was an absolute deja vu of when I'd met Tamara, my first wife. She walked in, and it was like lightning hit, and there was this knowing, like there she is. And it frightened me. In fact, at the time I thought, I probably need some psychiatric help. I'm too lonely. I'm too sad.
Mhm.
But it was as real as could be. And, same routine. It was funny because she was only in Utah for a short time. She had already accepted a position in Arizona. She was moving away, but we became friends, and then we became kind of pen pals. And yet, that became a relationship and then a courtship. And she's one of the angels that came. And that was interesting too. I felt guilty about that. When I realized I was having romantic feelings for her, I remember being back at the cemetery, on my first wife, my wife who has passed's grave, and I'm bawling and I'm angry, and I basically the conversation was, how dare you? How dare you go? I mean, I'm so lonely, and here I am trying to raise our son, and I can't even walk right, and you're in that beautiful place, and how dare you? I mean, that was the conversation. And I swear she came to me, I mean, I don't see her with my physical eyes, but as I was hunched over there sobbing into the lawn of the cemetery and pouring out my anger and fear and grief and everything, I swear I could feel her hands on my back, as if she just came and put her hands on my shoulders, and she communicated so clearly with me. And she said, don't berate me. I loved you enough to leave. And I'm like, what do you mean you love me enough to leave? That makes no sense. And the communication was, don't you remember? This was our contract. This was the deal. I would have loved nothing more than to stay and grow old with you, but your soul had an expansive experience it wanted to have, and I supported it, and I loved you enough to leave. And so
Mhm.
did Griffin. And you wouldn't be the man you are now. You wouldn't be learning or growing the way you are had I stuck around. And we made a deal. And I held up my part. And, of
Mhm.
course, I was still frustrated. And I said, yeah, but I'm having feelings for another woman. And I swear she laughed at me, and she said, of course you are. Why wouldn't you? I know who you are. Of course, why do you think you had the deja vu when she walked in the room? I'm aware of all of this, and I have no judgment of it. I want you to be happy. I want you to move forward. In fact, I'm trapped in your grief. I can only be as happy as you are. And it was an interesting conversation, if you will. But because of that, I felt fully confident in moving forward in the relationship. And Tanya and I were married, and we adopted 2 boys and rebuilt a family. And anyway, just miracles have happened, um, and continue to happen. And yet life has all the ups and downs. It has all the challenges. It has everything that every life should have. I always laugh and say we bought the ticket to the full feature film, and we wanted the popcorn and the drink and the candy, right? But the floor might be a little sticky, and there might be gum under the seat. And, I mean, we get the whole package. But from my perspective now, I realize that the whole experience is a gift. It's
Mhm.
it's my judgment of what's good or bad that makes it good or bad. It all is an absolute gift, and
Mhm.
every moment is absolutely sacred. And if we can live in those moments in the consciousness and the peace of honoring our life as a gift and honoring the people around us as a gift, even those that might hurt us or make us angry, is our greatest teachers. And I love your 4 pillars. I mean, when I read those, I thought, gosh, this is what I learned from my little peek to the other side. And I'm, you know what, I'm talking way too much, Kim. I'm ready to go into questions, and I know we're coming up on 8. I think we're going to go till 8:30 Mountain Time. Is that
Well, I
correct?
just figured we'd go and since you mentioned that, let me just share with everybody what this is what I sent him. This is like the bedrock thing that my program, we recite this, we memorize this. These are like our life standards we live by now. My true self is created from and is a piece of the divine God, infinite intelligence, pure love. I am perfect, worthy, inherently valuable as I am. I am not becoming, I am discovering and aligning. I am. And I love what you said is I am that I am, or however you said that. It's just that I am. And everything in life happens for my highest and best. There are no accidents, which was really interesting from what you just said. Life happens for me, not to me. And now is all there is. There is no then or there, yesterday or tomorrow, before or after. There is only now. And authentic gratitude is the doorway to accessing it. Relaxing and allowing. I made this word up last year. Relowing. This openness brings the flow of inspired ideas and actions. This aligns me with my true self. So that's what he's talking about. I sent this to him and I said, as I was listening to his video about his story, I sat there and went, he could have written like the four pillars just came out of him. That's why he referred to the four pillars. And I'm just,
Yeah, I love that. In fact, you put there is nothing to become.
yeah,
And these were the things that shifted. I mean, I grew up on the Bible. I still read the Bible. I still love things like that. I think ritual and worship and ceremony, all of that is important to me, but I see it so differently.
mm-hmm.
I was reading the great Beatitudes. This was several years ago because a lot of it didn't make sense anymore. I'm like, how do I make sense of what I experienced with what
Right.
I'm reading, or what beliefs might be and belief systems, and I was reading where Jesus said, "Be ye therefore perfect,
Mm-hmm.
even as your Father in heaven is perfect." And that, oh boy, that did that mess with me for
Mm-hmm.
decades in my life. And yet it just jumped off the page that he said, "Be perfect," not become. He
Right.
never said become, it was be. And then this flood came in of, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow.
Mm-hmm.
They don't spin and toil and yet more glorious than the greatest king you ever known. I mean, suddenly the message that the great master taught was so keen to me. I mean, I was reading in the same, Beatitudes of blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And I thought, gosh, I've in many ways seen God. I didn't dare turn around when I was held, but I was in the arms of God. And oh, I wanted that again. I wanted to feel that way. I wanted to feel that love. And I read it again. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And suddenly words that weren't even on the page just settled into my heart. And it said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God in everything and in
Mm-hmm.
everyone.
I love that.
And I thought, wow. And I do. I mean, to me, everything is a miracle now. Every sunrise is like, wow, look at this beautiful day. I might not get tomorrow. Like you said, all I have is right now. I love the four pillars. I have right now. What do I choose to do and choose to be in this moment? And that's a beautiful way to live.
I love it. Okay, I'm going to go to questions. So if you guys are on Zoom, um, go ahead with the Q&A link and ask it. And I'm going to just say them to you, Jeff, and then you can answer. If you're on
Okay, I brought my spectacles. I'm at that age now. I can read the questions, but if you want to read
Okay,
it to me, that's
okay,
fine.
okay. But also I want to read it because Facebook doesn't see it.
Oh, right.
So
Okay. Well, read them and we'll answer them.
what were your faith and belief systems regarding life and death prior?
Oh, that's a great question. And by the way, I don't have anyone's answers. I have my own answers. I'll share my answers, and I'll certainly give a response. You can ask me anything. I don't pretend to be a guru. I'm not saying, come follow me. I'm just saying, gosh, I had an experience, and I'll share the experience. My beliefs before the accident is I did believe in an afterlife. I believed in a God that loved me, but was going to judge me. I believed that I wasn't good enough and never would be good enough, could never measure up. I believed in compassion, but I was probably judgmental. It was more of a, well, I'm glad I know the truth. And those poor, um,
Uh-huh.
did I freeze again on you?
No, no, you didn't. I'm just chuckling at what you're saying because it's totally me. Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
yeah, it's like, well, let's call it elitist. Well, gosh, I'm grateful that I know, but I didn't know. I believed that there's things that I used to believe and hope for,
Mhm,
but now I said there's things I know, and when you know what you know,
mhm,
nothing can touch that. And yet, what I thought I believed had been turned completely upside down, because what I'd experienced was there is no limit to love. There
mhm,
is no us and them. There is no right and wrong. There simply is what is, and it's my judgments of it that define it.
mhm,
And I realized I'd been so judgmental. So I was a conservative Christian. I grew up as a Mormon boy in Utah, and I still embrace many of those beliefs and thoughts. But there's other things that I've chosen to let go and say that does not work for me. That's not true for me. I laugh when people say, "Well, what are you? Are you a Christian?" I say, "Yes, I'm a Christian, and I'm Buddhist, and I'm Jewish, and I'm Islam, and I'm all of it." And so are you. I mean, if I learned anything in those realms, it's to let go of the us and them and to
Mhm.
begin to embrace we. As we begin to embrace we and let go of our judgments and comparisons, that's when peace comes. That's the peace that surpasses all understanding. That's when we literally bring heaven to earth. And I still classify myself as a Christian. I love the Master Jesus. He's a dear friend of mine. And when he said things like, thy will be done, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, it's like he's calling it down. Thy will be done here on earth as in heaven. Let's bring heaven here. Let's bring the love and compassion and the connection that I felt on the other side here. And suddenly it'll be like holding my boy in the wheelchair. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to become. We can experience that right here, right now. And I think it's in our hands to do it.
So have you ever wondered why you're still here and what has been your processing of, I mean, Spencer's grown now,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
did your job, you did your
I
duty,
did that
you
when,
fought in
and
your country.
yeah, Tanya and I have raised two more boys.
Okay.
Our baby's 19 now.
Yeah.
And he's full grown. That's a great question, and thank you, because people have said, "Oh, you must have some great purpose. You must have some great cause to be here." And I always say, "Yeah, I do. It's to play catch with my son over on the side yard, and it's to hold my wife's hand maybe and watch that one sunset, or it's to smile to that stranger on the street. Those are the big things. The little things really are the big things." And yeah, I'm here. And when I was sent back, my doctor, Jeff O'Driscoll, the doc, I call him, he says, "You're the only guy I know that got kicked out of heaven." And I laugh and say, "Yeah, I suppose I did, but I got kicked out with so much love that I'm committed to be a manifestation of that unconditional love
Mhm.
here somehow to someone, and maybe to as many as I possibly can."
Mhm. So my question too is, what would you tell someone who has tragically lost a family member, either in a sudden accident, or I've many, a few friends that have lost their children, or even a prolonged, disease or illness? What would be how would you help them process that?
I'm going to draw from your four pillars, and this is a bold statement, and I realize when you're in the grief, you'll want to climb through and choke me. There are no accidents. There are no accidents.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's suicide, overdose, accident, old age, cancer, heart attack. I don't care what takes the life. There are no accidents. Everything's in perfect divine order. And the people who leave are our greatest teachers. Well, what I will say is, if you're experiencing that grief, that hurt, that loss, we're the noble and great ones, and said, "You know what? We'll come do that."
Mhm.
And those who have passed loved us enough to go, and they watch us. They're our greatest champions. In fact, I'll go as far to say that they honor us. They see us grieve, and sometimes from that higher perspective, as I was looking at my life's review, sometimes we're the most beautiful when we're grieving, when we're in the darkest moments of doubt and fear, because in those realms, they don't experience that anymore. And so they say, wow, look at the nobleness of my dad or my mom or my sister or my lover or my friend or my spouse. I, I, I'll share this, and it's a beautiful question. There's nothing I can say that will take you out of the grief. That's the other thing I've learned. I can't even pretend to know how you feel. I know how I felt, and the grief I went through. No one could say anything to calm that. I had been in the arms of God, and it didn't take my grief away. It didn't take my missing away. I would be down the road. I remember Tanya, my current wife, found me crying in the basement one day. because I'd run on to something that reminded me of my son, and here is a grown man sitting on the floor crying. And of course, she's very compassionate that way. But I had a dream recently before I wrote the book, before Knowing came out. I had this profound dream, and I'm going to call it a vision because I'm not even sure if I was asleep. But in this experience, suddenly I was sitting in the front seat of my dad's old pickup truck, before he and my mother had divorced. And I thought, I remember this truck. I remember sitting in this truck seat. I remembered the smell. And I mentioned we grew up on a farm, and the truck was full of feed, and the cows were coming, and they were eating the feed out of the back of the truck, and the truck was rocking, and it made me a little frightened. And I remember looking down, and I was wearing a red corduroy jumpsuit that had snaps on the inner thighs. And I thought, what? I hated that jumpsuit. What's? And I looked at my feet, and I had little toddler shoes on, the white ones that they used to lace up. And yet I thought, I remember this. I remember this like it was yesterday, but I couldn't have been any more than 14 months old. Then it hit me. I'm the age Griffin was when he passed. And in this vision or dream with the cows, I remember feeling frightened because I thought, the cows will tip over the truck, and what if they eat all the hay, and then what if they eat me? And I remember being scared. And in this memory, this vision that literally happened when I was little, but I was remembering it as if it was in the right now, my father came.
Oh, wait, stop. We lost your voice for a second. My father came. No, not yet. Try it again. No, not yet. Shoot. Okay, I can hear you now. Go ahead. My father
All
came.
right, we're back on. So my father came. If only we could edit this, but it's live and it's raw and it's out
Raw
there.
and real. Yeah.
That's right. So my father came, and he, shooed the cows away and jumped in the truck and picked me up and began to comfort me. And then as I just realized, wow, I'm 14 months old, all of it went away. The truck, the cows, my dad, the red jumpsuit. Suddenly I was me at my age, standing in that beautiful pasture that was our home. And suddenly there was this young man standing over in the field, and I knew in a glance that that's Griffin. That's my little boy, but gosh, he was grown, And I wanted to rush to him, and I couldn't. And there he was, and the grass was waist high. That's heaven to me, I guess. But he was standing there, and I knew him in an instant. And he just looked at me, and he began to communicate, but it was nonverbal. He just looked me in the eye, and what he communicated was, Dad, I wanted you to remember this. I wanted you to remember this so that you would know I'll never forget being your little boy. And I'll never forget what it was like to have you as my dad. And, at that point, wild horses couldn't have held me back. And I did. I raced to him. And again, it felt so physical. I embraced this kid, and he was a hunk of a kid, 6'3" and 225 pounds, if I was going to guess. And
Oh, wait, Jeff, wait. Okay, let's see if you're back.
tell me when I'm back on.
You're back.
Okay.
A hunk of a kid, 223 pounds, if I had to
Okay.
guess. And okay. Oh no. Too bad we're not telepathic right now. Too bad we need language, right? I don't know if you can hear me.
There it is. Are we back?
Yeah.
Are we back?
We are.
All right. We'll get through this. It's all in divine order. It's all meant to be. Maybe I'm not meant to tell the story, but
No, it's a good one. It's keeping us on the edge of the seat.
Well, he leaned in, and he said in my ear, he said, Dad, I have a message for you. And I thought, a message from my boy, who's this guardian angel like figure, and I've laughed and thought, I wonder if he's going to say, buy Apple stock, or something like that. But he leaned in my ear, and what he said is he said, Dad, I love you, and I'm proud of you. And, I thought, what more profound message could there be? I mean, he's looking out for me. He's looking over me. And in all my follies, all my things that I judge as mistake, he's saying, I'm proud of you. I love you. And anyway, and then again, I came to myself or woke up. But yeah, they're always looking out for us. If we've lost loved ones, particularly the ones that really hurt, I work with great organizations. Helping Parents Heal is one of them, a worldwide organization for grieving parents.
Hmm.
I work with, grief and loss a lot. And we're going to grieve. That's part of the experience. That's part of us getting our money worth. But those dear ones are never gone. They're never lost. They're with us. They're watching us. And even if we don't feel them, they're there. Now, I know I give long answers to questions, but my little boy, Spencer, 7 years old, he never had an experience. He never felt his mom. He came to me in his young adult life. He was probably 19, I suppose. And, he was off to college. He was playing in a rock and roll band. He was a talented musician. I was worried because, there was a couple band members were going to jail. There was drugs involved. It was life, right? And he came to me, he said, Dad, I never got any of that. You tell these stories of this profound.
Wait. Are you back? Are you back? Try.
Freeze frame.
Okay.
Let me know when we're back.
Yeah, you're back.
Anyway, I was incredibly concerned about him.
Because you had profound experiences, he said.
Yeah. He said, you've had these profound experiences, these visitations. You say you went to the other side. You say you dream of mom. You dream of Griffin. They come to you. And he said, Dad, I never got any of that. He said, I was a little boy. I was 7. He goes, for 10 years, I begged to God every day just to feel mom, just to have something, some dream, and he goes, I got nothing. So he said, either you're deceived and you're making it up, or if there is a greater power up there, it doesn't care about me. I was 7 years old and I beat my knuckles bloody on that door and it never opened. And of course I thought, wow, I still pray. I went home that night and I said, look, God, I'll give it all away. I'll give all my experiences away. If he can have something, if he can have anything, give him some light. This poor kid's wandering and lost. This was my prayer, And I don't profess to talk to God every day, but on this occasion, I had a profound answer. And it was a surprising answer because God said, why are you judging your son? Don't you know that his path is perfect and divine for him? Judge not that you be not judged. Why do you think your life's better? Why would you trade out your experience for him to have a different life? Don't you realize that his path is perfect? That his experience is for the expansion of his soul, and it might look completely different than yours, and that's absolutely A-okay. And what I was told was, your job, Dad, is to love him unconditionally. It's like, when are you finally going to get it? Love him if he goes to jail. Love him if the band takes drugs. Love him unconditionally. And that was a real reboot. And
so another question for you is, do you have doubts still? Like, do you struggle with doubt? I know you struggle with situations still, but is doubt?
I can honestly say I don't struggle with doubt. I have no doubt. I look, and Tanya gets angry when I say I look forward to death. Yeah. I have no fear of death. I have no doubt. I have no fear of acceptance. I still go through challenges in this life where it's like, am I accepted? I'm that guy with one leg that limps and walks funny, and I can't travel and move as fast as the other folks at work. Or gosh, even with Tanya, I thought, can she really love me? I'm half a man. How can I be the big brawny? I have those doubts in this mortality about myself and the experience. But what I know is that none of that matters. I'm not my body. I'm a glorious, magnificent, eternal soul, and so are you. And when we pass, I call it graduating. When we graduate from this life, we're going to go home to such loving, open arms that we can't even imagine it. And I felt no judgment. I don't feel like I'm going to be judged or thrown out. In fact, I think we're all going to sit down, and we might even laugh and say, "Wow, that was crazy," that thing we call life. And God, if you will, is going to say, "Well, tell us what you learned. Tell us what you learned being you, being a manifestation of us in your form, in your uniqueness, and you were perfect. Tell us what you learned doing that." And that's kind of how I view it. So I really don't doubt. I have no doubts about death, the life after, or the love that we're going to find there.
When you said about graduating, it hit me the other day, with all the death tolls that are in our face every day, the corona, COVID-19, blah, 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 we're up to this amount, we're up to this amount, we're up to this amount. And it's kind of strange because hearing these after death experiences like yours and others that I've been listening to and books I've been reading, I can't help. Now, I don't know any of those people personally, right? So I'm speaking from just that perspective, is going, oh my gosh, those people. Can you imagine those people? Like how they must think of what they went into. They had this, like probably a lot of them were maybe suffering from other things already in this life. That's what they say, there's other factors, but I think about it with like from the person's perspective that's leaving this heavy, sick, painful body, suit of clothes, you said, or something, and or suit of flesh, and then got transported. And but what I really wanted with this call is for people who can see the perspective from that viewpoint and not from the tragicness of it in our human sense that we would see it from, because that if we're physical beings having a physical experience, it would be really tragic. I can totally, and when we, like you said, when you expand that perspective to, but I don't die, no one dies, those people aren't dead, and they're still there, and they're still with us, and they're still around us. They're just, we can't physically touch them, but their energy, just like electricity and Wi-Fi and light rays and X-rays, they're all around us. We accept that. Why can we not accept that this love energy that created us and that's still with us? That's why you feel these things. And anyway, so sorry, that was my little.
No, I love it. I love it. I could sit and listen to you all night. I love how you said energy. Energy, to me, energy is everything.
Yeah.
And everything is energy. It's that, I mean, look at this miracle. Like you're where in
Yeah.
Oregon, and I'm,
Yeah.
1,000 miles away, and we're having a conversation, and I can feel the energy and the connection, even of the people that aren't on screen.
Yeah.
We pretend we're separate. See, that's the thing. Well, this is mine and that's yours, and
Yep.
I'm male and you're female, or you're,
Yep.
Republican and I'm Democrat, or what. We play this separation game all of our lives, that we're different, we're separate, we're alone, this is my group and that's your group, and yet the reality is we really are connected. We're one. I think this pandemic, in all of our separation, might actually open us up a little bit
Yeah.
to realize, hey, we really are connected. Gosh, what's it going to be like to embrace again?
Yeah.
When we can do that and give a hug, or we might learn a lot in this separation. And I think what we'll learn is that we're actually connected. We are
Yeah.
one,
We
and
needed
we get to
this to.
be,
Mm-hmm.
we get to be our unique manifestation in that oneness. But we are connected.
Here's another really good question too, that how do you respond to those who question your experiences, those like non-believers or people who anyway, the doubting, like this doesn't fit my belief system of my religion, or I don't believe in a religion, or
I get a lot of that, and I handle it in that it doesn't matter. I still get hurt. I'll get angry emails saying, well, you should believe this or you should believe that. But I would have never shared my story. I would have never written a book. In fact, I had no intention to. I shared that early on. I actually went back to the scene of the accident. And this was
milepost 80.
mile marker 80, yeah, on I-15 near Parowan, little town in Utah. But it had been interesting because I never shared my experience. I didn't talk about it. My brothers knew, my mother knew, but I really hadn't shared it beyond them. And then Dr. O'Driscoll, my doctor, because I figured if I'm nuts, he'll put me in the psych ward and get me the treatment I deserve to have, right? But I had shared it in a very small circle of people. And I was teaching a Sunday school class one morning. And part of the curriculum was the love of God. And I couldn't hold back. The tears just flowed. And I was saying some things that didn't necessarily fit into the norm. But a woman that was a neighbor of ours came up and she said, "Something happened to you, didn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it did."
Wait. Something happened to you, didn't it? Nope, not yet. It's coming back though. Okay. How about now?
There we go. Now
There.
I can hear you. It's funny. When mine freezes, yours freezes. So I kind of watch you and see what
Well, maybe
happens.
it's me.
I don't think so. I
We
think
always
it's
look at
both.
someone else, but maybe it's me the whole time.
It's just us. It's just
Okay, so
us.
something happened to you, she said.
Yeah, she said something happened to you and she wanted to know more. And so we invited her over to the house and I told her a little bit what had happened. And she said, "You've got to talk to this guy. There's a guy that studies these near-death experiences. He's at the university. He looks at them from a clinical, like, what was the belief system? What did they experience? What are the differences? What are the, commonalities?" And she said, "Will you please go talk to him? He's a friend of mine. You can trust him." And so I did. And after I finished talking to him, and of course, it was like tonight, I'm dripping and tears and wiping my nose. And he said, "Will you please come talk to a group in the city?" He said they meet. It's only about 100 people, but he said they're many of them are grieving. They've lost loved ones, or they're in late stage cancer. They're dying themselves. He said, "We even have a group of teenagers that are gothic, and they come in and they're obsessed with death." He said, "Will you please?" And I
Mm.
said, "No, no, no, no. I don't know. I don't share this. I don't talk about it publicly." And when he said to me, "Well, those that have lost loved ones may actually get some relief from what you have to say," that's where it got me. I said, "Okay," because this was 10 years after the accident.
Mm.
So I said, "Okay, I'll come and speak to your group," which I did. And of course, I was a blubbering idiot trying to share that publicly for the first time. And yet this fellow came up from the audience and he was a publisher. He says, "You're going to write a book." And I said, "No, I'm not." I said, I barely got through this, let alone writing a book. And that was on a Friday night. And the following Monday in my email was a contract from a publisher. And I just thought, oh, I don't know what to do with this. And I was saying, "No, I'm not going to do it." And Tanya, my wife, my current wife, said, "Well, maybe you should at least consider it. Maybe you ought to give it some meditation or some prayer." And that's what I did. But I went back to mile marker 80. That's where I went. I just felt called, like I got to go back to the scene because there was these barriers. It was like, number one, it was painful to talk about. Number two, I didn't want people to think I'm crazy. I didn't want all that doubt and
Mhm.
or we don't believe you, you're nuts. I didn't want to deal with that. But the biggest barrier was like, gosh, I don't know if I want to write a book, because what if the book is successful? What if it does well? And can I be that guy that capitalizes somehow monetarily with a
Mm.
catastrophe and I was driving the car?
Mm.
There was a lot of turmoil around it. And so I went back to the scene of the accident and I prayed, I asked, gosh, there's a contract in my email. I've been approached to write a book. Is that what I'm supposed to do? Is that what I'm here for? And again, I don't, I'm sharing a lot of these profound experiences. I don't profess to get answers every day, but boy, on this day, I got another answer, just like when I went about Spencer. And the answer was, and in fact, it's funny, it's a voice that speaks to my heart. I can quote what I was told. That's become my Bible, my scripture is what
Mhm.
God tells me. And I
Mhm.
was told, share your experience and people will heal.
Mhm.
Like, they'll heal? And, 10 years after the fact, I had done a fair amount of healing. And I thought, well, then if it's not about me, if it's about their healing, then I'll write a book. And so I went back and connected with the publisher and wrote the book. And I don't fancy myself a writer. Of course, the publisher said, "You're a beautiful writer." They were very impressed. I was shocked. And I was even more shocked because I figured, well, what's the difference? My mother will buy a copy and it'll be over with, right? But the book hit #3 in the category on Amazon in the first 10 days. And suddenly all these people were saying, can we put you on YouTube? Can we have an interview? Will you come lecture at our university or our hospital or our, writers club or whatever it is? And things changed a lot. So I get a lot of doubt. Like, well, I get a lot of emails. I get a lot of letters, and it doesn't bother me. It doesn't matter what they think. It's not. I know what I know, and it works for me. And yet, I have no agenda. I had no agenda in writing a book. I had no agenda in any of this. It's like I said. I'm not saying I'm the guru. I have the answers. I'm saying I had a profound experience. I'm sharing it, and you can take it and do with it what you will. And it really doesn't matter to me. I love you anyway, and I have no judgment of how you accept it because I have no agenda by giving it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hear your agenda is to, participate or help people understand. There is an agenda. It's just not a negative agenda. There's no manipulative agenda. There's no, you know, but you have a purpose in what you're doing. And I love that it matched what I'm trying to do on the planet. And, my experience of the love epiphany that I had is a very small drop in the bucket because, and I'm kind of thankful now after hearing your story that I didn't have to go do all that to have my little piece of heaven on earth, or, understanding that. But I want to kind of wrap up just by, I loved what you said about, I just went in and asked, which means you just asked your soul, you asked spirit, you asked God, whatever that is, whatever your word is about it. And my latest epiphany is that if we just get quiet and we quiet down the survival brain, which is where the fear and all the chaos and all the, what about this and what about that, and it's just the chatter that just goes crazy and just, and it is survival brain wiring. That's where it came from. And your survival brain is on high alert right now because survival is being threatened, and that's its job. And that's what your identity has been wired from, is that I have to make sure I watch every piece of news. I've got to make sure I know everything, because what if this? And when you look above it from observer, kind of like an out of body experience in a way, you can have an out of body experience right now just by moving to an observer standpoint, as if you're looking at what's happening. And to your point, noticing and keep going to an observer until you hit no judgment, because the judgment is where the damage occurs. That's where we get stuck. It's not what really happened. It's what we say about what happened. It's how we interpret that, right?
I love it. I love it. Yeah. I call it a higher perspective.
Yeah.
You look at it differently, and I got a little glimpse into that. But I love what you're saying, and it's very true for me. And so I suppose if the agenda is to hold a space or hold a context where people can find their own answers, and then celebrate and embrace their own answers, and I can celebrate and embrace their answers too, whether they align with mine or not, because it's in our uniqueness that the perfection's found. I mean, wouldn't it be boring if we were all alike? I mean, what would that be? And this duality, the fear, that fight or flight ego mind, if you will. There's purpose in that too. I mean, I feel strongly that we've come here to experience what we're not, that we can more fully embrace what we truly are, which is divine. We are light, but we wouldn't know that unless we experience this denseness, this lower vibration. It's almost like, well, gosh, I can't appreciate the lights being on unless I turn them all off, right?
Right. I love it. Well, you have given us, and thank you. Wow, this has been a great time, and pretty much people have been hanging in there, and I'm only knowing that that's because they're getting something from it. And I'm hoping that I know we've all participated together because we are one and we are connected. And we are the body, right? So when one part of us is edified and we all feel it, we're all, the rising tide floats all ships, so to speak, because we're all connected. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your story with us. And I know we'll be friends because
Oh,
I'm highly inspired by what you've given us tonight. And thank you so much for being on. Oh shoot, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. What a way to end. Can't hear you. Okay, try it
well,
again. There.
there you are. I said it'll come back and we'll shut this thing down before we blow up the internet.
Exactly.
But anyway, Kim, thank you for the light you are in this world and the vibration you bring. And I feel that, I see that, and the folks that you work with. I mean, together we will change the world in
That's
our
right.
little small, delicate, personal ways. But thanks for reaching out, and thank you for having me. And I'm honored to call you a friend. I
Good.
look forward to where this might go.
Okay. Thank you guys. Thanks for everybody that was on. Bye.